Right. Well, because and now I'll dive a little bit more into it. One of the things that has irked me, and again, I think it's for any marginalized group that any marginalized group that has members in the Republican Party. I oftentimes think that they're there as avatars. Think about how you got all these people, all these Latinos who are Republican, who are upset about immigration, right? Who that type of thing. Um, and it might be more prevalent in the Black and Latino communities. But I think one of their first roles, and they don't want to acknowledge it, is to shield the Republican Party from accusations of racism. Their number one priority, their number one objective. They may be there for whatever reasons, but the role that they're asked to play is twofold. It's to shield the party from racism, and it's also to go after the issues that impact that larger marginalized group and talk about them in ways that if white people were to say them, white Republicans were to say them, they would be considered racist. And one of the things that Black Republicans love to do is they love to talk about how the Democrats were racist and slavery and the Dixiecrats. And they want us to go ahead and acknowledge that Lincoln was a Republican. But what they don't want to acknowledge is that all changed in the 60s. It all changed when LBJ went ahead and signed the Civil Rights Act. And LBJ said we'll never win the South again. A lot of those people that were Democrats that did racist things under the Democratic banner, they stopped being Democrats. They became Republicans. They found a home in the Republican Party. So that's first and foremost. The other thing that I think is really ridiculous, and just so you know, on the sensitive subject of interracial dating, I've dated interracially. I have no problem with interracial relationships. I have interracial relationships in my family. There is absolutely nothing wrong with interracial relationships. However, when you have Byron Donalds, when you have Wesley Hunt, when you have Tim Scott, who we are not even sure if his significant other is really his significant other, that's a whole nother story. Um, when you have all these Republicans that are trying to preach to Black Democrats about the Black family, there's one problem. They don't have Black families. They have biracial families. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And they grew up in Black families, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But if they are going to lean into the Black family issue, then they might have a lot more credibility if they actually had Black families. So again, no shade. Who knows? I plan on being with my partner forever, and she's African American. But if for some reason I'm not, I could easily end up in an interracial relationship. But there is something to be said about the fact that Byron Donalds wants to lecture Black people about the Black family when he is actually not it that he did not start a Black family, right? And the whole issue about Jim Crow and a lot and what's funny, and I'm sure you and I run into the same thing when we do this pod, is we hear things and we don't want to just continuously repeat what we hear because then we don't have original ideas. But I do think one of the things that's really important is that Byron Donalds has been pointed out to him, if Jim Crow, which he so wistfully missed, was still in place, he couldn't marry his wife. Wesley Hunt couldn't marry his wife. Tim Scott could not be engaged to Mindy, if that's her real name, if that engagement is real. But the the thing that really angers a lot of us is just the kowtowing. And Colin Powell, maybe J.C. Watson, just so you may or may not know J.C. Watson. J.C. Watson was a famous Black Republican, but he was also a badass quarterback in Oklahoma, and that's where most Black folks came to know him. But those were probably the two of the last handful of Black Republicans. Michael Steele, to a certain extent, who I'm a big fan of now, wasn't always. Those were the last Black Republicans I know of who still kept their dignity as it related to issues of race. You can, and just so you know, one of the things that really is a problem for Republicans is there's a lot of black folks are probably just like a lot of minority groups, Latino, I'm sure, Arab, but for racism, there'd be a lot more black Republicans. But for racism, there'd probably be a lot more Latino Republicans. And what the Republican Party biggest problem is that they, rather than just going ahead and having the black Republicans, the black conservatives model conservatism, they use them in a manner that's offensive to black folks, and thus they alienate black folks from ever becoming part of their party, if that makes sense. And as the Republican Party is going through, and I don't give Republicans much advice, because in a two-party system, I definitely believe in Democrats and only Democrats. But if there's one thing good that can come of the Trump years, is that the Republican Party is going to be destroyed, I believe. And if the Republican Party is going to be rebuilt, because we do need a viable two-party system, if the Republican Party is going to be rebuilt, the one piece of advice I have for them is to finally get it right on race, on gender, on LGBTQ. Because think about all of the different marginalized groups and minority groups. Don't you oftentimes see conservatism, and this isn't in that space that you feel like you can't answer. It's definitely a space I think you could. Don't you think that the biggest problem that the Republicans have is that on a lot of these issues that have potential racial overtones or undertones, rather than going ahead and speaking about their values and speaking about conservatism, they see a way to divide us, and to divide us along race, to divide us along religion, to divide us on sexual orientation, to divide us on gender. They approach those issues not from a principled standpoint. Even if there is a principle there might not really be a principle there, but even if there's a principle there, they lead with division. So what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that?
When you say they, you're talking about Republicans, right?
Right.
Yes. So you said a lot of interesting things, and I don't know if you brought it up. So I don't know if you caught this Twitter conversation this week about black conservatives, because there was a viral TikTok that went. There was a TikTok that went viral that said there was a black creator that was saying that if you just stripped away the Republican Party from just the very, very of the extremist views, there would be a lot more black Republicans that existed. And black people were having this conversation online. And I was actually talking to a friend of mine I knew from high school, actually. And we were having a conversation about Trump and Biden and what we thought was going to happen. And he asked, he's not a Trump supporter, but he asked me, he's like, what do you think it is about Trump specifically that people really like? And I told him, I said, at this point in 2024, I think it's racism. He's like, but like 75 million people can't be a fan of the racism. I'm like, it's not about being a fan of it, right?
Yes, they can. Yes, they can.
And I was telling him, I was like, it's in 2016, I think Trump had plausible deniability. The Central Park 5 stuff was decades ago. He lost the lawsuit in the 70s because he told his super not to rent to black people. That stuff was so far removed. Maybe New Yorkers remembered it, but most of the country didn't even know that. And I was telling him, like, he's gone after every single group. He's gone after black people, Mexican people, the Muslim ban, immigrants. He called African nations shithole countries. He's gone after gay people and trans people. He's gone after everybody. He's gone after women. He's gone after everybody but the white man. And I was telling him, I said, I have no choice but to believe that it's the racism, or at the minimal best case scenario, the racism isn't a deal breaker for you and you just want the tax break if you're in that tax bracket. And so, you know, there's another interesting conversation, John, because people are saying Biden should be replaced. Like, not. We're talking Nate Silver, right? There's a conversation of we should replace Biden at the top of the ticket, right? Which is asinine at best. But let me flip the argument. If Republicans ran Adam Kinzinger, I think Biden would lose this election. If you just ran a normal Republican, the way things are feeling, Biden would probably lose. But Republicans refuse to do it. They're so caught up with the racism and with everything else. That's why I think it's the racism. To answer your question, you said, do you think that's the Republicans' best case scenario is kind of strip it of the far right extremities and get back to a more central candidate and they would win? That doesn't exist anymore, John. This is who they are. I don't think there's putting that rabbit back in the hole. Now, I will say this. Those very, very extreme Republicans did not win in 22. And they haven't won special elections, and they didn't really win in the runoffs. So there's a case to be made that Trump is very singular and unique in that factor, that he wins those elections, but candidates like Kari Lake got blown out, right? Herschel Walker, like et cetera, right? So maybe the Republican Party isn't as far gone, and they're just waiting for Trump to kind of end so they can move on. Maybe that's the case, but I just think the way the Supreme Court is being looked at now, the way they're going after IVF and birth control and everything like that, I don't think you can strip it of the racism and the extremism because that's all it is now. So that's my general kind of thought.